We're really so excited to have you all here with us. And the second dialogue, EVALSDGs second dialogue on big data challenges and opportunities. In case this is your first dialogue with us, just giving you a background on the EVALSDGs Insights. So the insights for your information are short, easy to digest notes, very brief notes about an issue of an evaluation and SDGs that are easy to digest and easy to read. Recently, we have published 2 insights on big data and evaluation and the use of different tools on the evaluation of SDGs. And our the author of these 2 insights is Dr. Michael Bamberger, our speaker today, whom my colleague Aisha will be introducing in a bit. It is an important topic, and our speaker is an important person. So we are so delighted to have Dr. Michael with us. The recent 2 insights are now available on our evalsdgs.org website. So I encourage you all to go there and to check them. The dialogue today will go around these insights. So we'll have discussion and interactive discussion on the 2 topics. Because of the limitation of the time, we will not be able to cover everything. However, all your comments or your feedback will be taken into consideration for future insights and future dialogues. Allow me on that occasion to thank our colleague Scott Chaplew, the editorial lead for the 2 insights, for his very insightful contribution and informative feedback throughout the process. And before we start, I would like to give you a very brief introduction on the use of Zoom. For those who are new to Zoom, what we will be using today is the chat button. Just to the bottom of the screen, if you hover your mouse, you will see the chat button in the middle. If you click on it, please feel free to introduce yourself, to interact with the team. Our team will be available to answer any of your questions. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please add them. And it would be good if you just add Q&A before your questions so that we can address them, whatever we could cover today. And there is also the reaction to the right of the bottom of the screen. Let's have it an interaction session. Feel free to just click it and share your reactions with us. And with that, I think I can move it over to my colleague Aisha Miranda. Please, Aisha, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you all. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Aisha. I'm also part of the SDG guidance group, and I'm from Sri Lanka. Let me introduce most famous and known 2 personalities for today's discussion. One is our speaker, other one is the moderator. Both are very famous and known in our field of evaluation. Michael Bamberger, as a PhD in sociology, is the speaker of our today's event. Let me say something about him. He has a PhD in sociology from London School of Economics. He has been involved over 40 years in the evaluation of development program in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, including 25 years as a senior sociologist with the World Bank. His work has focused on poverty and social inclusion, gender equality, urban development, and the challenges of evaluating the SDGs. Over the past few years, he has worked on the opportunities and challenges of integrating new information technology into evaluation and development program, which is very interesting. Few of his publications, notably known, his recent publication including Measuring Results and Impact in the Age of Big Data with Peter York and Veronica Alzaban. Evaluation in the Age of Big Data, dealing with the complexity in development of evaluation with Jose Balsan and Esther Raimondo. Real-world evaluation, which is famous and known in the world, working under budget, time, data, and political constraints with Linda Mabry, and evaluating the sustainable development goals through equity-focused gender response evaluation with the Marco Sigonia Forencia. He has also organized a number of workshops and webinars on big data evaluating, including for World Bank, Technology and Mountain Evaluation Research Training Network, EVALSDGs, and Latin American Evaluation Network, and UNDP and UNICEF is few of the famous organizations. Over the past 20 years, he has consulted nearly 10 UN agencies, multilateral, bilateral development agencies, development banks and foundations and NGOs, and government on evaluation, development policies and programs. It is really sure today, the discussion going to be very, very interesting with such a famous and known experienced personality. Let me introduce my friend, the moderator, Dr. Florence Etta. My gosh, she is an award-winning evaluator with over 25 years experience in development, programming, and evaluation. She's currently serving as a CEO and principal consultant with the Grenade International Consultant Limited, Nigeria, a monitoring, evaluation, research social enterprise devoted to supporting CSOs and NGOs in bridging the CSO government divided in country, which is most important part of the world today. She served as sixth president of African Evaluation Association, successfully established. It is an independent organization hosted by University of Legon, Accra, Ghana. She served as the first and founding chair of the African Gender and Development Evaluators Network, AGDEN, established in headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. Florence has worked and consulted in international development agencies, including the International Development Research Center, IDRC, UNICEF, USAID, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, UN Women, UNIDO, Oxfam America, UNICA, ClearA, and she has consulted many organizations, as I know. She has been a team member, a great team member, and a leader of numerous multidisciplinary research and evaluation projects, written and edited evaluation research publications. Before joining international development practices, Florence spent 16 years as a lecturer, researcher, and Nigerian higher education institutions. Florence has and still continues to contribute to the growth of African Evaluation Association, AFRIA, and particularly Africa Gender and Development Evaluation Network, AGDEN. AGDEN, as a member of EvalPartners, is a global organization recognized player in this specialized niche. Between 2015 and 2019, Florence served as a member and chair of the UN Women Global Evaluation Advisory Committee in recognition of her work in gender responsive and the human rights sensitive evaluation in Africa. Since 2015, Florence has been active member of EVALSDG, EvalGender, and EvalIndigenous. In July this year, she was elected to be a position of co-vice chair of EvalSDG. With these two personalities, I'm sure today will be the most interesting and most informative session we are going to have. Florence, over to you now.
Great. I'd like to thank Isha for that very generous introduction. We are moving straight ahead and we're keeping to time. Thank you very much for those two actions already undertaken. We are now going to have a bit more interaction. We're going to have our first poll. Well, in fact, we have all three polls together. We have 3 questions and we're polling them right away. And Katinka is going to manage that for us. And can we encourage all of us to quickly respond to the polls? If you're joining us from a car, for example, from a restaurant somewhere else. Please respond to the poll question on the screen, on your screen. Thank you. And do submit. Done, great. Thank you very much. People are done. Please submit. Thank you. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. We have 3 poll questions, one after another, but I guess we will see the responses before we go to the next one. Is that correct, Katinka?
Yes, Melina, can you show the results, please?
They're coming.
Fabulous. Great. Katinka, do you want to react to those?
Yes, with pleasure, Florence.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having responded. As you see, most of us actually are currently working from home, from wherever we are, and no surprise in the current situation. but there are also a few who work from elsewhere. So we are looking forward to your responses in the chat. Maybe you have some nice locations where you're currently connecting from. The second question is more related to the topic of today. So have you ever been using big data for evaluation? And the majority, 56%, actually haven't used it yet. So we hope that today's discussion will actually maybe open you up for possibly using it if there are opportunities in the future, or at least better understanding when it would be useful to use it. When asking about what types of big data, and here I'm just referring to Michael, who will come back to what are the different types actually in a bit, you have been using, most of you have been using dashboards already, and others indicate social media analytics, mapping technology, machine learning, satellites, drones, and remote servers or sensors, artificial intelligence. And then again, there are some other examples normally coming up in the chat box. Feel free to give some examples of how you have been using big data already in evaluation in the chat box. We really look forward to hear more from you on the specific experience you have. Thank you so much for having participated to the poll questions. Back to you, Florence.
Florence, I guess you are muted.
Thank you. Great. So now we're going to go straight into listening to the guru of big data. Michael is going to tell us, start with examples of big data. That's a good place to start. And then he would take us, show us how big data is currently being used or has been used or can be used in evaluations, SDG evaluations. Thank you, Michael. Over to you.
Hello to everybody. It's a great honor to have a chance to talk to so many of you. And it's good to see that quite a lot of people have some experience now with big data. A couple of years ago, if you did a poll like that, you'd find probably a lot fewer people had done any work with big data. So I'd like to begin by just giving a few examples of different kinds of big data. And this will be helpful for then coming back to think how we define big data. So these are not the only kinds of big data, but there are some which are used quite widely. The first are satellites and drones, which collect images of different levels of detail. They can cover very, very large areas. They can also cover over time to track the changes. So these are used for many areas, tracking migration, looking at agricultural production, looking at housing quality, identifying poverty hotspots, and nowadays for identifying the spread of COVID-19. The second kind, which a lot of you have experience with, is social media, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, WhatsApp, where you get a continual flow of data which can be analyzed to capture attitudes, behavior, recently looking at hate speech, false news. There's just a very wide range of areas being used a lot in gender analysis, looking at women's participation in elections. Third is radio calling programs, which are very popular in rural areas where people don't have access to internet. And very often these programs focus on a particular topic, like something to do with agriculture, or people talking about the problems of education for their children. So you can collect a lot of data on a particular topic and capture people's attitudes. Fourthly, mobile phones, which everybody is familiar with. These have a huge range of applications in evaluation. You can look at people's social networks, who talks to who, different kinds of behavior, how well people receive information, for example, on health programs, and do they actually follow up and take their kids to the clinic? Do they follow up on recommended practices for agriculture? Mobile phones are also used for identifying poverty. It turns out that the amount of airtime of topping up which people do for their phones is very sensitive to changes in their economic situation. When you have less money, you buy less airtime. So this has proved to be a very good short-term indicator of changes in poverty levels. Text analytics is something relatively new. This is analyzing all of the PDF files which organizations collect over time. And you can look at trends in organizational behavior, for example, how an organization changes their approach to gender or social equality. So this is a way to analyze huge amounts of information which people have just sitting in files and they've never really used because it was too complicated. Then finally, internet searches, looking at the kind of information that people look for on internet can be a very helpful for predicting behavior. For example, if you look at the number of people who are checking on job opportunities in a different city, this can be quite a good indicator of people's plans to migrate. It's also been a very powerful tool in tracking infections. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of the very wide range of big data tools and techniques which are available, and all of which have been used in evaluation to some extent. So that's just to give us a little bit of a flavor of what we're talking about. So back to you, Florence.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Now that you've given us examples that we can feel of how sample big data can be used in SDG evaluations, I think we can now go to our first big question. So exactly what is big data? We recognize some of these with satellites and drones and Facebook and radio and mobile phones, but how can we describe or define big data?
Great, so can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So these are some of the characteristics which are usually talked about to define big data, and they vary a little bit according to the kind of big data you're talking about. But the first characteristic is that big data is too large to analyze on an office computer. Normally you need to have a network of linked computers to be able to analyze the billions of bits of information you get from a satellite image, or from hundreds of millions of pieces of information from social media analysis. So this is the first characteristic. It's just very large and requires special computing facilities. A second very important characteristic is that big data normally covers almost all of the population that you're looking at, which is a very dramatic difference from evaluation, where you normally have a very small sample because information is very expensive to collect. So the fact you're covering the whole of the population is a unique and very important aspect of big data. Then something else which is new to most evaluators is the ability to generate a time series, in some cases now over a period of 15 or 20 years. So you can look at how a city is evolving. You can look at how irrigation networks are expanding. You can use this in human rights. Recently in China, mapping has been used to study the construction of the camps where the Uyghur populations are being held, and you can, because once the roof has been put on, you can no longer see what kind of building it was, but if you track this over time, you can see how things are evolving. So time series are again very critical, including for evaluation. You can have time series going into the future. We talk about the sustainable development goals, but almost no evaluation actually looks at sustainability because it's so expensive to collect data over a long period of time. So you can do this relatively easily with big data. It's also generated very fast, almost in real time. This compares with evaluation, conventional evaluation, which might take 6 months to collect and analyze the data. Another important characteristic, it's non-reactive. The fact of analyzing social media data doesn't change that data. Now, if you think how this compares with conventional evaluation data, if you ask a farmer about his income or her income, she may tell you that she's very poor if she thinks that she may become eligible for subsidies. On the other hand, she may try to give you the impression she's better off than she really is because she wants to show that she would be eligible for getting a loan where she has to have some collateral. So the information can change very dramatically according to how people see the context in which it's being collected. Whereas with big data, you don't change the data by analyzing it. So again, another very big difference from conventional evaluation. Then you can collect data on just a much wider range of kinds of information. You can analyze voice data, photographs and images, text, numbers, geospatial data. So there's just a huge number of different kinds of information which you can collect, which were almost impossible to do with conventional evaluation. And critically, you can integrate these into a multiple data platform, so you can compare different kinds of information. And then finally, it becomes possible to have powerful new kinds of analysis of predictive analytics. You can actually recommend how a program should change, and you can build in changes as the program evolves, which is, again, is very different from conventional evaluations, where the evaluation is like a post-mortem. It doesn't come out until the program is finished. So again, these new kinds of dynamic analytics is a very important characteristic. So this, in summary, are some of the characteristics of big data, the way it's normally defined. So over to you, Florence.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. That was very, very useful. I like the fact that we can tell the story using big data as it progresses, but it's a real challenge in relation to just looking at all of those in terms of cost. So when we consider big data and our current situation, Michael, we're looking at SDGs, evaluating the SDGs, but our reality, our contemporary reality, is the coronavirus pandemic, the novel coronavirus pandemic. How can one do this in the current situation? Evaluating the SDGs in the age of COVID-19.
Right, thank you. The person who answered that question properly will get a Nobel Prize, but let's go on to the next slide and just have a look at some of the issues. If we can have the next slide, please. The next one. Okay, so here are some of the challenges which are facing SDG evaluators, and then I'll come on to how big data can help you to resolve these questions or contribute to resolving them. So some of these are old challenges, some of them are new challenges, or which have been made more acute by the coronavirus. So the first big challenge today is the limitation on the ability to collect face-to-face data. Sorry, my timer. So now it's very difficult to be able to go into the field to collect data. So this is an area where big data can obviously make a major contribution. Then the second challenge has always been, even before the coronavirus, the very high cost of collecting data, so that you only work with very small samples. And one of the challenges with small samples is that it's very difficult to disaggregate data to look at different subgroups because your sample is too small. So just that the cost of collecting data has always been a challenge. It's more so now because you need new kinds of data for understanding the dynamics of the spread of a virus. Another challenge. Then always, but even more so nowadays, the challenge of reaching vulnerable groups. All of the discussions on the coronavirus state that certain groups are getting left out. In the United States, it's very often the African Americans, some of the Hispanic groups, people who are generally poor, don't have access to easily medical services. So being able to identify and interview these groups is always a challenge because it's very expensive, and a lot of the groups don't want to be interviewed. If you're HIV positive in many cultures, this is a big stigma, and so people don't want you to know about that. Again, if you have the coronavirus, you may not want people to know. So reaching the vulnerable groups is a challenge. Then, as we've already mentioned, it's very hard to collect longitudinal data covering many years to see the way things are evolving. This again is very critical with the virus because it's evolving and changing very, very rapidly. So you need to be able to track patterns over time. For many of the SDGs, you need to be able to track the changes over periods of 5, 10 years. So this again is another challenge. Then something which is really critical for all evaluations, particularly for the coronavirus, but it's too expensive to collect data on the wider context in which programs are operating. So many evaluations have a very limited vision. You're only able to look at the population which is directly affected by your program and maybe one comparison group. But most programs are very complex and they're influenced by many factors: economic, sociocultural, political, environmental, demographic. So many evaluations are really ignoring the dynamics of the culture in which their programs evolve. This is particularly critical with the coronavirus because there are just so many factors which affect the spread of the virus: your political ideology, your religious ideology, your age, your sex, but also just if you're in an area where the economy is growing, the dynamics of the spread of the virus are very different than if you're in an area where there's high levels of unemployment. So being able to understand the broader context is very challenging, and something which evaluators have always had a problem to capture. Then a number of things which it's hard to monitor: behavioral change and the processes of project implementation. Processes are always very difficult for evaluators. They're very good at measuring changes between 2 points of time, but the actual process of change is harder. The organizational systems within which programs operate is also a challenge. So here are a few of the challenges which we're facing as evaluators looking at the SDGs, but particularly in the age of the coronavirus. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So
if you want to take some of the questions that have come up now.
Okay, that would be fine. Thank you.
Some of them that apply at least, yeah? We have, it seems to me that you may have already answered the first question which came in. It says from Etienne, what might be the potential drawbacks for evaluations using big data? I'm not sure if that is a challenge or a drawback. So that was the first question. The other one you might want to consider now is, what are the triggers to using big data? When and when not to use it? This is from Miguel Lopez. So just those two questions seem to be perhaps just right about now. Might be useful to give us a quick response, Michael. I will put them in the chat box for you, if that's going to help at all.
I've got them noted down, but people might like to see them in the chat box.
Okay.
At the moment, I'll only go into this briefly because it's a topic in itself. One of the drawbacks of big data is that for evaluators is that many evaluators are not familiar with big data. If you take a traditional evaluation course, you tend not to talk much about big data. I'm sure this is going to change, but at the moment, there's a whole generations of evaluators who really know very little about many kinds of big data, so they feel a bit uncomfortable using it. And so one of the challenges is you need to build bridges between evaluators and data scientists. At the moment, there's a big gap between the two groups. A lot of data scientists, not all, but a lot, rather look down upon evaluators as being old-fashioned. They're using techniques which are, they consider to be out of date. And on the other side, a lot of evaluators are somewhat suspicious of data scientists, that they don't understand evaluation methodology, they don't talk about causality and theories of change. So there's one challenge is just the lack of familiarity. The second is this gap between evaluators and data scientists, which you find in many organizations as well. A lot of organizations have an innovation center, a big data center, and they have an evaluation office, and often the two hardly talk to each other. So these are just a couple of the challenges. There's also big ethical challenges of using big data, of getting access to information on people without them knowing, making decisions about people's lives without them knowing that the government is using data to make decisions about whether they want to have water and sanitation in the community or whether they want the roads improved. Nowadays, you can get the agencies deciding people would really rather have water and sanitation without even consulting with anybody, just use the big data. So these are challenges which are very critical. And so the need for bridge building of developing a common language and understanding between data scientists and evaluators is very critical. Some of the other thing is just a question of the accessibility of big data. It has an image of being very expensive and too technical for evaluators to use. This is not, in fact, correct. If you bring in a consultant, you can use big data in the same way as you could bring in a consultant to help you design a statistical sample. But there's a very strong image. I've been to many seminars where NGOs say, you know, big data is really great. You know, if I work with the World Bank, I'd love to use big data, but obviously we couldn't use it for our organization. We don't have the resources. And that's not necessarily correct, but this is an image. So those are just a couple of the challenges. As one could go on for a long time talking about the ethical challenges. In terms of the triggers for using big data, it's really a question of having people in the organization who are aware of the potential of when it could be used. And so many organizations may not have that familiarity yet. So one interesting thing we could talk about later if we have time is the idea of identifying pilot projects where the data scientists and the evaluators could work together basically to assess what is the value added of using big data. Not just can it be done, but is it worth doing it? The effort and the cost, do you actually reduce and improve product? So that thinking about, this is one important trigger of identifying areas where on a small scale you could test the potential utility of big data. So we can come back to that later if we have time and if there's interest.
Thank you very much, Michael. There was one more question. I think we just might have just enough time to respond to that. Is you've already talked about the ethical issues, and I do know that you will come to the ethical issues later in the day. Jessica asked, how do we address ethical issues in the collection of big data? So you might want to say that now, or you might leave it until we get to the slide that you already have for ethical issues. So how do we go about that? What do you want to do, Michael?
Thank you for bringing it up, because these issues are really critical. Maybe I'll just mention 2 or 3 of the ethical issues now, and then we can come back to it if we have time. But I'd like to say ethical issues is something which tend not to get very well addressed. It often comes in at the end of the report or a discussion. So it's very important that ethical issues come in right from the beginning when you're designing your evaluation, thinking what might be the ethical issues. So it's very critical. But one of the big ethical issues is that people lose control of data which is affecting their lives. They don't even know that the data is being collected. So that's one set of issues. Very often big data is sold to an organization, you know, this will save you so much time and trouble. You won't have to waste time going out to the community and talking to people. You can just sit in your office and understand what it is that they believe that they want. So there's this, the exclusive nature, potential exclusive nature of big data. It can be very inclusive. It can be a very powerful tool for community change, but it can be very exclusive of just the people with the resources use the big data to make decisions about other people's lives. And then just a final point, a lot of people have a sort of magical faith in the power of big data. So there's many automated decision-making processes now where organizations use an algorithm to make decisions with very little involvement from human beings. And there are some terrible examples of things which can go hugely wrong because algorithms very often have a bias against poor people for reasons we could discuss, but those are just a few of the reasons. Let me just mention very briefly one example of how serious this could be. In the city of Cincinnati, big data was used to identify people who weren't eligible for getting welfare but were actually receiving it. They used an algorithm, and the city was very pleased that they eliminated about 500,000 people, 500,000 people from the welfare rolls, and they cited this as being a big success. when they looked at how the algorithm had worked, there was various places where you had to provide information about yourself, your address, and so on. And if for any reason you made a small mistake of how you spell the name of your street, the algorithm classified this as refusal to cooperate with government, and you were just cut off the welfare rolls. So they estimate that maybe as many as 500,000 people were cut off from welfare just because of a mistake within the algorithm. But initially the government would say, isn't this great? You know, look how much money we've saved cutting off all of these people who weren't eligible for welfare. So there is tremendous benefits, but if you have a blind faith in big data, you can make some very bad mistakes. As you can with it, you can do the same with evaluation, you know, if you misinterpret the results, but it's worse with big data because it seems more magical and it's harder for people to understand what is actually happening within the algorithms. So those are just a couple of things we might come back to if we have time, but please remember the ethical challenges are critical throughout any kind of evaluation, but particularly when you're using big data.
Thank you very much, Michael. So now can we proceed and go back? Do you want us to continue with the questions, or should we just proceed with, there's a question here that basically says, if one, and that was asked by, let me see now, if one wants to use, on a very practical level, Elena asks, if one wants to try using big data for a given evaluation, what type of big data sets could be easily accessed by evaluators in the context of the SDGs, or in fact any context, even if it's outside of specific SDG purview? So the question is from Elena. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Elena. It's a good question. One temptation to avoid is making the use of big data tools driven rather than question driven. So a lot of data scientists, they look around and they think what kind of big data is easily available, and they jump in and start analyzing that without really thinking, is this the kind of data we need to address the really critical evaluation questions? So it's obviously important to understand what kind of big data might be more accessible than others, but don't just jump in and use data because it's easily accessible. There have been probably millions of studies done using social media simply because it's very easily available, it's free, and all of the analytical tools are available free from Facebook or from Twitter or from any of the other sources. So lots of not very useful evaluations have been done using social media. Some very valuable evaluations as well, but a lot of them were not really very useful, but it was just so easy to get the data rather than thinking of some other kinds of data which might be more expensive or more challenging to get. So that's the first point. Really understand what your questions are and think what kinds of big data might be useful for answering those questions, rather than thinking what kinds of big data might be easily available. But just in general, lots of kinds of big data are available relatively easily and cheaply now, but there's the image, they're very expensive. For example, there's lots of kinds of satellite data, which is available free, and it's relatively easy to bring in a consultant to help you to use this. Social media data, a lot of people have some familiarity with that. Some things get harder, more expensive to use. If you're doing analysis of radio call-in programs using data from rural areas, one of the challenges you get is the problem of language. In many rural areas, people speak more than one language, or they have very different dialects. So you often need to have some fairly sophisticated tools for identifying which language is being spoken and maybe translating it to French or to English, whatever the language is that the analysts work with. So using radio calling data, for example, tends to be more expensive and difficult than using social media or using satellites. But one of the things just to remember is that there are a lot of consultants around who can help you with this. In the same way You don't have to be an expert on statistical sampling to get help with designing a sample. You bring in somebody who's an expert. But the key thing, whenever you're bringing in a consultant, you have to understand what the question is. What you can't do is call up the university and say, could you send along a data scientist to tell us how to evaluate the gender impacts of our program? You have to know what are the questions that you want to ask, how they're going to be asked, and then you can bring in a consultant to help you to do that. But the consultant can't tell you how to design your evaluation, which is, a lot of people sort of imagine a consultant so smart, you know, they can just take over the evaluation for you, and that will have very fatal consequences if you lose control of your evaluation. So those are just a couple of points. But I think the main message is that a lot of kinds of big data are potentially accessible now, but there's still the image that they couldn't be. A lot of people nowadays are beginning to use graduate students who are doing a master's or a PhD, who have a very good background in these techniques, and they can come in relatively cheaply to help you. Because a lot of people say, oh no, you'd have to get a consultant who's going to cost you $1,000 a day, and we could never do that. But you can get some very bright, very well-trained graduate students nowadays who can help you with a lot of the very basic kinds of analysis that you might want to do. So really think of these as being potential tools which are available if you do your homework. But on the other hand, don't believe that these are magical and some clever person will come in and solve your evaluation problem for you. It's a tool, it's not a complete solution.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. We have very little time left, and in the short time we have left, I thought maybe you might want to proceed with the few 2 or so slides that we have left. You were going to talk about the ethics of it, and then we have this complexity map, if you have maybe a minute for that. And of course, I'm not sure we have dealt with how big data can help us. We have done that. So let's go to your last slides. Thank you.
I have one more slide on how big data can help. So
yes,
we'll jump to that. I'll leave the complexity map just to say that most programs are complex, and you need to understand the complexity dimensions of the program. Most evaluations don't do that, but we could come back to that if there's time. But I'd just like to remind us that how big data can help. The first way it can help is by remote data collection in the age of the COVID-19. So this is really a critical benefit. Almost all big data is collected remotely. So you're just able to continue evaluations at a time when you wouldn't be able to do this face-to-face. Also, big data can greatly reduce the cost of data collection.
The slide.
Right.
The slide, please.
The next slide, sorry. Okay.
Good.
Big data can reduce the cost and the time for collecting data. So you're able to collect more data as well as being able to collect it quickly, which is very critical for looking at the COVID when things are changing very rapidly. And then we've mentioned a tremendous benefit is longitudinal data, which is really critical for the SDGs, that they are sustainable development goals. But as I said, there's very few evaluations which do actually look at sustainability because it's expensive and complicated to do. So having longitudinal data is very valuable. You've got this from satellites. You've also got it now in social media. You can begin to get some trend data over quite a few years. So that's very, very, very critical, because most programs, you need to understand what effects did it have over time. If you're trying to get girls to complete secondary education, some of the benefits from this may not come for 5 years. You know, if you're looking at whether the health of their children when they get married will improve, whether it's more likely their children will go to school, maybe 5 or more years before you can see the results of your program. An irrigation system, you need to know, is it still working 5 years from today? Not just is it beautiful and shiny the day the minister cuts the ribbon. So longitudinal data is a really major area of help. And then the fact that you can collect many different kinds of information from text, from photographs, from sound. And so you can just look at many more dimensions of human behavior. and they can be combined. And then, again, something very critical, the very rapid analysis and dissemination of the findings. One of the criticisms of evaluation, you can have a brilliant report, but by the time it comes out, it's too late to be of any use to anybody. The program's ended. Whereas with big data, you can have very rapid feedback and make recommendations on how programs can change in real time. Very, very, very critical, because many people say the vast majority of evaluations are of no practical use because they just come out too late. Then there's many sophisticated kinds of analysis which are now becoming possible with machine learning and artificial intelligence, the ability to the predictive analytics to actually predict how things are going to change and test whether this is correct, rather than just looking backwards. Systems analysis, understanding the interactions between different organizations, which a big program may have as many as 100 different stakeholders involved. So being able to understand the relationships between them is very critical. And then just complexity, understanding the context within which your program is working is very important. If we had more time, I'd go a little bit into some of the things you can do with artificial intelligence, but maybe we'll leave that to the end if there's time. So these are some of the exciting ways that big data can help with evaluation, and they're all feasible. They could all be used in many evaluations, but you have to have people who are familiar with big data and who could understand both its benefits and its potential drawbacks. So this is the message that big data is a potentially valuable set of tools which evaluators will be increasingly using in the coming years.
Very much, Michael, for telling us how big data can help. And if I had my way, we'll probably we'll have another poll right here asking how confident are we that we can do all of this in the very near future as evaluators. But you do have one last slide on ethical considerations. Michael, do you want to take that? Because we don't have enough time. If we take that, we'll have no room for more questions. Because we wanted there to be a little bit of time at the end for all the questions that haven't been answered. Yeah. Just be, the point we're going to try to do is harvest all the questions and represent them to Michael and see how we can perhaps get some answers, you know, for the major ones, and relay them back to all the participants at this Zoom meeting. Does that sound like something we should do? But I think, Michael, that we should at least leave some time for additional answers to questions that have come in.
That's fine. So we'll leave the slide here on the ethical responsibility for data collection, and you can read the different categories, but this should be the first item when you're designing an evaluation. The ethical responsibility. You can do great harm to people with evaluations in many different contexts. You can do great good, but you can do great harm. So one should always be thinking about this. And so please keep this in mind. So back to you, Florence, for any final questions you'd like to.
Let me ask Cecilia and Katinka. They have both been harnessing questions to see if there's any one or two or three in particular that they find particularly interesting and that have not so far, that Michael may not so far have, may not have discussed so far, but are useful and reasonable for us. But perhaps let me ask a very silly question before as you're looking for those particularly good questions, two of them. Michael, do you think that we as conventional, traditional evaluators are in danger of losing ground in the near future to people like data scientists, like statisticians, like ICT gurus? And if that's the case, how should we, in a sense, reposition ourselves in relation to the SDGs and the whole area of evaluation? I don't know if that makes sense to you. I think it's a silly question, but.
Well, I dread to think what your clever questions are if you consider that silly, because that's a very profound question. there are two potential scenarios that people talk about for the future of evaluation. The dystopian, the pessimistic scenario is that evaluators just say big data is terrible, they don't use theories of change, they don't use our method, so we should just ignore it. That's the attitude of, certainly not all, but quite a few evaluators still talk about how terrible big data is. So you could, it's a fact of life that big data is going to become increasingly important in all of the agents that we work with. And if evaluators just dig in their heels and say, no, this is not the way we do things, this is not the way my grandmother did evaluation, so I'm not going to bring it in. You could have a situation where when an organization wants to evaluate them, how well is this secondary school education program going, they won't talk to evaluators, they'll go to the data scientists who've already developed this big data set, they will run an algorithm, and in 2 days they will say the program's going great. So this is the dystopian, the pessimistic scenario where evaluators dig in their heels and refuse to collaborate with data scientists, including within their own organization when management is talking about how to incorporate big data. Will evaluators be sitting at the table? Will they have an influence, or will everybody say, oh no, we don't want to invite Florence to participate because she's just going to go and complain and cause trouble? So that's the dystopian scenario. On the positive side, big data has tremendous potential to strengthen evaluation. And if evaluators become familiar with big data, collaborate, if you get organizational linkages, bringing the departments together, evaluation could just become much more powerful, much more rich. We'll be able to address questions like the coronavirus, which it's extremely difficult to do with current methods. So it could go both ways, and but there is a risk that evaluation could become marginalized if evaluators are not at the table when decisions are being made, if they're not able to assess the value added of using these new tools. It could go both ways, and there's capacity development is going to be critical. Is the new generation of evaluators, are they going to be familiar with big data? What one should mention, some of these challenges are generational. Younger evaluators, they grow up with big data. 50 times a day you look at your cell phone, and so it's not an alien threatening world for them. And but it is a challenge for evaluators at the moment. And if you look at a lot of evaluation courses and training programs, they're still not really addressing big data very much. So it's a challenge. Hopefully 2 years from now, when we get together again, we'll have found that big data is being used more.
Thank you very much, Michael. We have just room for one last question. Katinka has given us two, and Katinka, you have given us two. Do you want to tell us which of those two you like? Because we only have time for one. And the other nugget you gave was from Etienne, which was telling us, in a sense, giving us his position. So which of those questions, Katinka, would you like Michael to spend the last 2 minutes addressing?
Tough question, Flo. Yeah, what a tough question, Florence. We have received so many good questions today. All are equally interesting, so it's very hard to make a choice. So let me quickly read out the questions to Michael. The first question is about access to big data as well as to their processing and analysis system remain challenges for local evaluators. Are there concrete examples from certain evaluators, particularly on gender equality? And the second question, what are the challenges to direct applicability or need for preparation of big data in terms of cultural and societal inequalities? So you might have referred or to some a little bit, but I let you, Michael, choose how you can respond to both together or one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. They're very good questions. And on the cultural aspects, one of the observations of many NGOs of why they don't want to use big data, not all NGOs, but it's a comment we've heard quite a lot, is the question of trust. That evaluators have built up, and community organizations have built up trust with the local communities over a number of years, and people understand what kind of data is being collected. And if somebody does a survey, you've got a pretty good idea of how it's going to be used. It's going to go to the Ministry of Education, or it's going to go to the USAID or to whoever. So you've got a fairly good idea, and you know the people who are collecting it, and if you trust them, this goes a long way to making people feel comfortable. So one of the things which a lot of NGOs say that one of the reasons they would be nervous of using big data for many purposes is the community will no longer know how the data is being used. It's this very strange process that they don't understand. So this has been a kind of cultural challenge for a lot of NGOs in thinking about the use of big data. I'm sure there are broader cultural challenges of how the data is being used. One of the related issues is if you're using big data, understanding the gender dimensions of access to data, how you can use it. Just the example of mobile phones, that there've been many reports saying, you know, how great mobile phones have been for women. They've empowered women, enabled them to participate in the affairs outside their community, which is true. But it took a long time before the studies started to come out showing the negative consequences for women of having a mobile phone. The husband got very jealous. There's some evidence of domestic violence increasing because the husband was jealous. He didn't know who his wife was talking to. So those kinds of issues, the potential challenges and negative consequences of using big data, which occurs in many different contexts, is something that we need to be very aware of. It's the other question about the access to big data is probably not time to discuss that now. There's a lot of UN agencies and some of the bilaterals as well are trying to make big data available and collaborating with different local agencies. Universities, there's a lot of resources there, people working with big data who could help, but it's unfortunately it's a sort of broader question which we need to talk about, and just giving the people the understanding that big data is potentially accessible. But I'm afraid there's not really time to discuss that in any detail. Incidentally, just one site, if anyone was interested, to go to the UN agency called Global Pulse, which is the UN Global Pulse. That's the UN agency which works with big data. If you go to their website, they have over 100 examples of how big data has been used in all of the different techniques we've been talking about. But I'm sorry, there's not time to go into that now. It would be great to have an opportunity to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm afraid we've spent the hour. We just have 2 more minutes to say thank you, and I'll hand over the mic to, who was supposed to close? Sorry?
Edda.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Over to you,
you,
Ada. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me turn on my camera. Yep. Okay. On behalf of the organizing team, that's the EVALSDG guidance group. I hope you can see me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Let me thank Dr. Michael Bamberger. Really, it was great. You took your time, your busy schedule, you left all that and came to make the presentation to us. It was very educative. You are passionate, we've learned a lot, and I'm sure also the group, the participants have learned a lot from the presentation. It was educative also and very inspiring, as evidenced by our charts. Let me also thank Dr. or Mr. Scott Chapler, who is not here, for his guidance and a lot of rich input when we were preparing this Insight dialogue. And I can't forget to express our gratefulness to EVALSDG leadership team, of course, for reviewing and guiding and giving input to the content of the Insight dialogue. And let me appreciate the great team from the EVALSDG guidance group for tirelessly working day and night, having sleepless nights, having meetings, making calls to see these insights become a success. Thank you all. I don't know if I can mention all of you. I may leave some out, but please forgive me. There's Dr. Florence Seta, who was our moderator and did a great job. Hayat Askar, we have Melina, we have Lynn, we have Isha Miranda, we have Katinka, we have Leonora, Cecilia, and Ravi, and everybody else. If I've left out your name, just forgive me in advance. Let me thank also the participants. Really, you made it happen. You attended, you made it very lively, and I'm hoping, just like us, you also learned a lot from Dr. Bamberger. And we look forward to meeting you in our next dialogues that we will be organizing. Thank you very much. And I take it back to Hayat. Is it Hayat or Dr. Hayat?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ida. Thanks all. I think unless Dr. Michael Bamberger would like to add anything, or Florence, the time is, we are done. So, but thanks again for everyone for your great contribution and interaction. And for Dr. Michael for this great, amazing presentation. And
I wish you all good success, and particularly in these challenging times which we're living in at the moment. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And don't forget to keep your eyes peeled for our next dialogue. The point about a dialogue is to have a conversation with everybody. So we don't call them presentations, we call them dialogues. Come back for our next dialogue. Thank you so much, everybody. Like Michael says, keep safe. Bye.
But thank you so much for everybody. Thank you, Michael, Etta, and Hyatt, and everybody. Katinka, this is a great day. It's a great debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.